Hey everybody, it is Sunday, September 7th, and this is Tinderbox Meetup with Michael Becker. I'm Mark Bernstein, the designer of Tinderbox, and it has been interesting week here at Tinderbox World Headquarters, and next week is the run-up to the Hypertext Conference, so that's going to be interesting too. Without further delay, here's Michael Becker.
Hey everybody, welcome to the meetup. So typically what we do is we go around the room and new people introduce themselves. RTA seems to be new. I haven't seen that acronym before. So if you want to introduce yourself, that'd be great. Otherwise, we dig into projects and topics that we've all been working on and or any themes. We don't have a theme today, so let's just jump around and go around the room and talk about our projects and topics and projects. There has been one request, Mark Bernstein, to continue the kind of Git discussion and review that a little bit more because people liked that. And I've been having pseudo semi kind of success with trying to pull together a training course around that. So if we have time, maybe we can dig into that again a little bit more. But other than that, let's go around the room. What do people have on their mind today? Anything new?
I've been holding my breath all week, Michael, for the definitive coverage of Git.
Yeah, well, we're not going to have that today. You're going to have to hold your breath for at least another week. I had several challenges to overcome this week.
To shorten the comment, I mean, this is one of the activities that is fundamentally despised internally in companies. So to introduce it as early as possible is very, very important.
Yeah, and so if we can, let's just kind of have that I don't know what's the word I'm looking for. That let's just have the conversation and see if we can walk through it and discuss it again with each other. I think, and with Mark Bernstein's guidance here, we may be able to figure something out. Last week we had a somewhat of a failed attempt. Mr. Anderson.
Yeah, I've really stuck my head above the parapet. Partly because I think I've now completed the house move from Acrobat Fact to atbref.com for all the atbref material. So that's 10 baselines and various other files. The idea is I want to do it all under one domain. And there haven't been a litany of complaints, so maybe I've done a reasonable bang-up job. So I've used some regex such that the baselines that I've put onto adpref.com. So for instance, if you, for whatever reason, say want to go and look at the version 6 baseline, the links in it should keep you on that domain and not send you back to the old one. The next chance is to make sure it's in the Wayback Machine, and then I'll probably start thinking about turning off the stuff on the old domain just to wean the search engines off it. So that's a primary thing, and I may have to dodge off early today because I've got a large data analysis task on for Monday. But it's been interesting watching the AI stuff going through, which I've been trying to keep on top of, and also prepping. It should be interesting. Some of the XR work I've been doing in another forum will probably make its way to Chicago as well, which will be interesting in the light of the Information City view that Mark's been working on as well. Thanks.
Yeah, on that note, so another agenda item we can have, I've pulled together a kind of AI infrastructure graph that we could share and talk through if people are interested in that, looking at all the components that are behind putting together an AI. So that would be fun. We could do that as well. And I guess, could you give a little bit more background on what in fact you were talking about and what you did with the ATB-ref? I don't think I fully grokked or understood what you were working on.
Well, okay, as briefly as I can. It's atbref.com, which I registered, gosh, rather a long time ago. And it's been on my to-do list since forever to basically take it off a domain that actually bears no relationship to the subject, which is where I first put it back in 2004, and put its own domain, so that it's a bit of death cleaning in a way. I mean, it's not that I'm intended to go anywhere, but I would like to get in the point that if for any reason I just need to hand the whole thing over to somebody, then it would be like that, because I think it completes the point of the sort of corpus of work. So in other words, it doesn't depend on something. It's all under that domain. Anyone who's got the keys to that domain and the master Tinderbox files basically can run it all. So that's basically what I've been doing. And it just made sense to put it in one place.
I mean, can you drop that new URL in the chat? So we have it.
Yes. I mean, basically anything you're using at the moment, if you just change sorry about noises off outside. I don't know what that is. But joys of inner city living.
We hear nothing. You're all right.
Appalling would-be music going past on a scooter. So essentially, I've put a divert page on the. If you go to atbref.com, it will actually divert you to the URL I put there. The one thing I haven't got around to writing is a sort of home page for the site, which probably actually will point you to the current thing and tell people who know nothing about it a little bit about the history. Otherwise, I've got all the redirects running. So if you follow any of the redirects on any of the old baselines on either domain, it will actually take you to the URL I've just posted, and fairly soon that'll be version 11.
Got it. And how much, like, what did you have to do in the underlying TBX file to make all that work? A lot of work.
Actually, less than I thought. I did it basically in terminal. I basically used some regex, and went through and looked for any references to the old. There was. Suffice to say, I screwed up a few times before I got it right, but eventually, yes. And now it's just a matter of going through each of the 10 baselines that there are, checking them and then moving them. So it was a bit of faffing about getting all the stuff done. Plus the fact that my hosted it was classic. I for some reason when I parked the domain there earlier, now when I wanted to do the ATBRF domain, now when I wanted to use it, the system was very sniffy about that, and boiled down to the tech advice was, well, you need to download everything first, i.e. turn it off and on again. I thought, oh dear, So essentially that's what I had to do, but it's all up and running now. And yeah, it was probably less work than I thought. It basically took, I think I did it last weekend.
Nice. Okay, anybody else have any other topics? Jeremy, what brings you to the table today?
Actually, a couple of blog posts by MB about AI and stuff, but unfortunately I have to drop off in half an hour, so I don't think it'd be fair for me to ask for elaboration on that. But yeah,
anything is fair. We've got times. Go for it.
Okay. Well, Mark wrote a couple of blog posts that just sort of appeared in my RSS feed today, actually. One called Corrupt Discourse, which I think probably you wrote in August, is that right? Talking about the different ways people are talking about AI, and that we're kind of missing the wood for the trees, that this is a technical breakthrough along the same lines as jets replacing buggies, etc. And I was kind of interested in hearing that, because I've felt that generally kind of a generational thing where, the older we get, the less we believe this is transformational. So I was kind of intrigued by that. And also about posters. A second blog post that Mark wrote was a disappointment about the use of posters, the poster feature within Tinderbox, and I was kind of anxious to hear more about that. But as an infrequent member, a frequent joiner on this session, I realized that I may well be asking for repeats of something that's already happened.
Repeats are welcome. You don't learn anything without repeat, so it's all good. So which one do you want to start with?
Up to Mark.
Or all the ones. I think Mark, you want to
I mean, the corrupt discourse post is actually from this morning. The other one's from August, which is all of what, 5-7 days in our rearview mirror. So completely out of date. Obviously, we've talked about posters several times on the forum, and it is almost always, I don't understand what they're for, or I can't make them work. In fact, it was really quite straightforward to teach Claude Desktop to make posters, after which I literally had trouble dissuading it from making a new poster with a new technique in response to just about every question. And, I had to say enough with the posters, but this is interesting. And in fact, Claude was making posters with APIs that I hadn't used before, which is what I expected by now the meetup and the forum would be regularly doing and aren't. So I was expressing the hope in that post that, okay, maybe this is the way to get unstuck. Not even specifically that in the future, all posters will be made by AI, but if the AI turns out to be a reasonable way of getting you unstuck when your first cut doesn't work, uh, that's fine too. If your stochastic parrot is really good at telling you forgot to close a quote, and you're not used to worrying about unclosed quotes, which lots of people like don't care, don't see why it matters why you capitalize some words in programs and not others. I actually spent a half day on a bug where one API expected a object called content, and the other expected an object called contents. And that was completely opaque to me. I mean, I stared at it and I stared at it, and it just would not accept this. And eventually I asked Claude, can you figure this out? And said, yeah, it's stupid. It should be contents.
Wow.
Uh, so yeah, I think that this might be a one way to get posters, for example, less stuck than they are. Uh, the idea of using let teaching the AI to use Tinderbox to take its own notes, to persist things it's learned in a session to a future session is, I think, a huge deal. It impinges on a current fad called retrieval augmented generation, or RAG, uh, and another one called intercession memory. But it is actually fairly new, and it's been really easy to get somewhere in the vicinity of the edge of this. And after all, what we're talking about is having a system write notes in natural language to its future instantiation, which will give it a starting point. Uh, this is a sort of conversation with a computer, which has been it's the essence of all programming, but it's actually been the stuff of science fiction through my whole career. I mean, we don't care, to hell with impact. We've been trying to do this sort of thing for a very long time, and now we can do it. And there are clearly interesting research questions and solutions lying around all over the place. But you get onto Reddit or you look at the popular Medium posts on the subject, the ones Medium or Substack are pushing. You look for bloggers, and it's all Anthropic's going to make lots of money, or Anthropic is going to go out of business before December. It's just completely dull, uninteresting, uh, banal. I don't know why that is. Stack Overflow stayed good for like, what was it, Chuck, about a decade, and only got abandoned because AI was actually better at answering the questions you used for Stack Overflow. But like, AI discourse is just horrible.
What do you mean by
I-
that? What do you mean by AI discourse?
Well, you go out and you look on the web for stuff about the current revolution. In the places where you would expect fairly technical, serious, hands-on discussion, like Reddit. And you see very little of that. You see things that I characterized, like I started a software as a service that I vibe coded with an AI in 3 days. And I did this the day before yesterday, and my annualized run rate is over $100,000 a year. Yeah, like great, but come back and tell me how it's gone when your annualized run rate has run for a year.
And what? And again, can you explain annualized run rate and all that?
Uh, it's another term I don't think the author really understood, and I don't completely understand, but it's the revenue rate for an enterprise. In fact, if I really needed a precise definition, you're the guy I'd go to.
Yeah, no, I was
It's
thinking,
not precisely annual revenue, and it's not precisely burn rate, but it's the amount of
what popped in my mind when you said that was the cost of running the AI. I think a lot of people don't understand too the tokenization costs of what it means, and there's a lot of I don't hear enough discussion of actually the economics of making all of this work.
Actually, there's a tremendous amount of discussion of that, most of it complaining. And again, it's the attention seems to focus more on the way to get cheap AI rather than the way to get useful AI.
well, and there's so much just resentment of it costs too much and so it's worthless, or there are too many people using it and it gets busy too much and so it's worthless. Uh, there's a lot of what I take to be uh, essentially expression of grievance for one's childhood or something, one's powerlessness in the industry, which is like unfortunate and like worth discussing, but not not in this way in these places.
Your comments, Mark, reminded me of the early days of time sharing when people would complain about it's slow, it's expensive, and there are too many people using it. So it makes it worse. That's an interesting reflection on 50 years of turmoil in the IT industry.
I think it's the hype machine, the internet hype machine. All of these AI companies and legacy companies that everybody wants to make money. Everybody wants to maximize shareholder value, and everybody is scared to death that AI is going to eat their lunch. And so part of it is you have to go to scale. You have to reach the widest audience, an audience that does not know what to do with AI except make funny cat pictures or nudes of celebrities. If it were a traditional type of high technology like jet aircraft, it would be a small community of people flying them, using them, talking about them, learning about them. We have democratized all of this stuff, and maybe it's the tragedy of the commons. I mean, everybody feels like they have to have an opinion. Everybody has to weigh in on the thing of the day, and AI happens to be the thing of the day. The industry is falling all over itself, trying to make sure that they don't miss a bet on AI. This is a mess. I'm happy I have a lot of yard work to do, so I don't have to think too much about this stuff. So that's my opinion.
Yard work, Dave, including shoveling manure, I hope.
There's a big pile out back, but yeah.
Yeah, I think that one of the biggest challenges that you know, again, the dialogue. I like your comment, Dave, that it would be it's nice to be able to kind of ignore what's going on, but at the same time, when you're in a position like myself, you can't. So, for example, I'm teaching a strategic mobile marketing class this term, And I've consciously and specifically put an integrated AI in absolutely everything that the students and I are doing. So much so, like the group projects tied to AI, because I need them to also understand the implications that this will have on their own learning, their own growth, their own critical thinking. Where does this go? Because it's not going away. So we absolutely have to figure this out because it's an existential crisis on learning and teaching.
One of the things that I came across recently was an interesting observation that many of the next generation, those who are in their late teens, going off to college, things like that, actually hate AI. Why? Because they perceive it's just going to take away all the opportunities they had previously focused their lives on. That, you know, many of the jobs that they might have considered, careers they might have considered, they're afraid AI is going to take away from them. And maybe that's hand-wringing, but maybe it's not.
Well, I mean, it's
And,
some
you
level
know,
like PwC and some of the major consulting firms that are often the pipelines leading into startups and technologies and business. All this year have said they're dropping 30 to 40% of their undergraduate college pipelines. They're just not hiring college students anymore, and they're not training them. And a lot of that has to do because of AI and their use of these new tools and the more efficiencies they're generating. So we're really losing this tried and true infrastructure to prepare the young adult for the future.
well, there's a, I guess I'm a little bit skeptical that the big five consulting firms are dropping staff due to AI. I think a much more plausible explanation is they're dropping staff due to loss of market in foreign countries, because that has been one of the biggest exports from this country has been consulting. And so you have to sort of question where are people making excuses based on AI versus AI is really
Michael, be
making a
grateful.
difference.
Share this with yourself. My
Sorry.
word is alignment with my dharma.
Sorry, it's my auto affirmation tool. I'll turn it off.
Thank you.
I think also it goes back to even a younger, the sort of the pre-leaving school generation. Kids in school perceive great unfairness that AI is allowing the less capable in the class to get away with a lot. And the teachers are having to adapt very quickly to this. And it's very difficult for the teacher because on the one hand, it's quite clear that AI is being used in homework, etc. But then, of course, the children themselves have to, even if they don't use AI, they need to be really confident that it's not going to be suspected that they use AI. And so there seems to be, in some ways, a kind of compression where you've got the less able kids using AI up to a point where they think they can get away with it, and the smarter kids not wanting to almost appear too smart by doing it on their own because of the fear of being accused in a classroom in front of everybody else of using AI. And these are cases that I know of personally.
Or you've got a friend of mine who is very well accomplished entrepreneur, and her 10-year-old, she actively encourages him to use it, to the extent that she was joking with me the other day on how funny it was that he was saying, write me what I guess maybe not 10 or 11, what, a 7th grade, write me a 7th grade paper on this topic, make sure you interject enough typos that it actually looks like it came from a 7th grader. And she says, isn't that smart of him to do that? And I'm like, oh my God, that is so scary. But but she's like reveling in the fact that he is getting smart enough to game the system to interject that. And so that's somewhere in the middle, I think, Jeremy, what you were referring to.
Yeah.
One interesting thing I have noted in terms of someone's mentioning cost and things is that a task I've been doing just recently, a number of things that used to just work don't anymore. So the misbehavior by the AI companies has had everyone tightening up access. So I needed to run some scripts, basically just to dereference a lot of information. None of those work anymore. Basically, I mean, I can do work fast enough to appear like a boss online, which I don't take as a badge of honor, but it shows the problem. So whereas you used to just say, well, I need to, dereference 100 things, I won't ram the server, but I'll just let it run away. It doesn't like that. It just wants you to do one thing at a time. And I can only put that down to the inappropriate behavior by the AI companies. So someone said apparently something like 30% of the web traffic at the moment is AI bots.
Well, and that depends on whose traffic you're dealing with too.
Yeah.
Some websites have been just totally obliterated. They're 200 or 300% of what they used to have in the way of traffic. And it's not customers, or users. It's not the audience they wanted. It's AI systems.
But of course, I'd much rather have Google or an AI go out, look at 10 or 50 sites for me, digest it, and give me the answer to the question I wanted, than to go to a site, read through 10 ads, click through the GDPR notice, click through a pop-up asking me for notifications, and then find out it's not the right thing.
That's the fear and anxiety of overturning the model of the internet. It's an advertising medium. Well, what are we going to go look at next?
The part of the problem is that we have a rivalry between not just the major big tech firms. That's bad enough, but we've got a rivalry now between nation states. So Brazil, for instance, has a bunch of AI startups that are some of the worst offenders in terms of attacking. Basically, they're in this mad scramble. Before they shut down the internet, we've got to go out and capture as much of it as we can to train our AI system. And you've got India, Pakistan, China, the Philippines, Brazil, other Latin American countries, all viewing this as the future of their nation states. They've got to go do this. And it's so totally out of control. And then, you've got Google, who has abused their the fact that most websites want to be spidered and want to show up in the search results. I mean, SEO, search optimization, has been such a thing for so long. And now suddenly that's been turned on its head, and we realize Google is using a capability that everybody has allowed them to have for years for a totally different purpose, training their AI systems.
Well, tell me,
and do
Google,
they have some competitive advantage over everybody else doing that?
Tell me, Google hasn't read the entire archive of Gmail.
Of course they have. They use their CAPTCHAs to train their AI systems, and always have. I mean,
it just frightens me with Google, because the general, the Afghan guy who had the girlfriend who was a reporter, and they shared an email address on Gmail, and that's how they kept their relationship supposedly secret. If Google wasn't reading everyone's email then, before then, they should have started at that point. I mean, indexing it and knowing Google knows everything about everybody. And I think Musk has exfiltrated everything out of the Social Security database into Grok. I'm another fearmonger.
Except that the Chinese beat them to the punch years ago.
Right.
Literally. Remember the Experian fiasco. That was China basically hoovering up credit reporting for just about every American who has an account anywhere.
Well, yeah,
and they keep that, and they build databases around it, and they're at least as good as Google, if not far better. So
there's an interesting. I mean, there are interesting gaps, though. I mean, there's definitely. I'm definitely seeing signs that there is a sort of digital dark age that starts at about somewhere in the. It's anything that was too late to be, too early to be done digitally, and too late to be put into, redigitized. So I guess that's why. Actually, for instance, when I have tried to use AI for any sort of research, it comes back for nothing. But I'm looking at hypertexty sort of stuff from around the 80s, early 90s, and it's just rubbish. and you have to dig really hard, and even actually finding things. A classic problem, and you know, it's interesting. For instance, with Google, is you want to look for something, but what you actually get are references to that thing in the references of other notes, and then it has no mechanism for you to say, no, I don't want you to look at the reference list of this thing you've spidered. I want you to find me the thing that you found. I actually want that reference, and that's incredibly hard at the moment, and not getting any better, and something I doubt AI will solve, because I mean the big job I'm doing at the moment is another pot mess that when you open up, it's the UK ref. So for my chemistry university chemistry department asked me to look at something, and it's embarrassingly amateur, the data management there. They're actually trying to work out whether the data is really what it says it is, and properly track it down is remarkably hard. I'm not suggesting that the people who were doing the marking of the papers weren't doing that properly, but it's a clown car underneath, which grieves me because it's public money. So as a taxpayer, I'm remarkably unimpressed, and I'm sure it'll be just as rubbish the next one that we're limbering up for. But it shows that problem. It's partly because we're doing all this AI stuff and we're not doing anything else. So I keep seeing this in systems that for instance, no one speaks for the data. There are lots of people who tell you what you can't do with it, but there's no one says, you know, in the hopper in the middle, is there anything worthwhile? You know, are we doing the right thing? No. There's just a sort of panoply of people on the side who either want to rip stuff out of it or tell you what you can't put into it. So that's an interesting sort of challenge that we shall have to resolve as well.
Got it. And Jeremy, are we answering your question?
Yes, you are. I have more to ask, but unfortunately,
Right.
I've got to drop off. But thanks. It's a really interesting conversation, and it's clear where there's a lot of concern about this, and we might find in a few months' time that the bottom drops out of all this, the money kind of shrivels up, and we suddenly are having to pay hundreds of thousands of dollars for those tokens. But I feel like if people like Mark B sort of see it as something that is going to be genuinely transformational and that it helps an app like Tinderbox, I think that is quite exciting. It might be perceived as a kind of a lesser achievement, but if there is continuity between the kind of the world that we're all familiar with and the next one, maybe that's the greatest chance of some sort of success.
Before you drop off, if there's a couple comments, if I can make. One thing we didn't discuss, and I'm concerned especially in regards to a tool like Tinderbox, is this whole idea of the collection of fallacy, right? One of the biggest challenges we'll have with this is we can generate or have AI generate a tremendous amount of chaff and crap for us, feed that into a tool like Tinderbox, and we think we're making progress, but all we're doing is just stuffing more crap into the garage. And actually not thinking, and actually not processing, and actually not learning. And unless we properly and effectively use the capabilities and the tools that Tinderbox gives us to then visualize and pull out of all of that, I think for many of us, we'll end up causing ourselves more harm than good. So that's one of the dialogues that I didn't hear us talking about. And then before you leave, and we'll discuss this now while you're gone, and you can watch the video later, is a diagram I've been working on, and we can talk about it now if you guys are interested, and zoom around on it, and all of the different elements that constitute making up private public AI that actually lead to us generating outputs or contributions. And it kind of highlights all of the different core tenets and core concepts that need to be driven in here and all that. So, you know, if you're all interested, I'll be happily walk you through my thinking in developing this, or we can move on to another conversation.
Well, I'd love to hear the chat and watch the video. So please say yes, somebody.
All right, great. And Peter, your hands up. All right, Jeremy, thanks for joining and kicking off the conversation today. Appreciate it.
Thanks, guys. Bye.
I'm a member of a group of lawyers who are interested in technology startups. It's called Codex out of Stanford. And basically, every week, one or two startups will come in and they each get 15 minutes to demo their product. And there's this mentality at the moment that AI is piece of magic that's going to solve every problem, and it is the hammer. And every single legal problem is a nail that they're going to bash with the AI hammer. So we had, for instance, a guy from India come in this week, and he has this wonderful AI system. All that you have to do is drop the divorce filing that you receive as service in the mail into their system, and it's going to walk you through your entire divorce. Don't even worry about getting a lawyer. But if you want a lawyer, we have these couple lawyers who are going to pay to be on our platform, and we will let you select a lawyer and select a paralegal from our list of people, and that will be your legal team that will get you through your divorce. And I'm thinking, oh my God, why did I go to law school? This is clearly going to be an unauthorized practice of law problem. Now, I can see creating a nice little product to walk someone through what a typical divorce experience is like, but you're going to throw someone's divorce service papers into an LLM and have that come up with, here's a set of forms for you to fill out, and I'm going to fill out all the forms for you to do your own quickie divorce. Maybe an expert system would be appropriate for this, but a large language model that's going to have random variation just thrown in and can hallucinate things is the last thing you want to trust the outcome of a divorce proceeding to. It's insane. But every single one of these companies, one company after another, they're all, well, we just throw the documents at the LLM, and then you don't need to hire any law school graduates. The LLM will just spit out the answer for you. And yeah, maybe you get lucky, maybe even 60, 70% of the time they'll do the right thing, but that remaining 30% of the time is going to destroy the life of your client and get you on the wrong end of a lawsuit that's going to cost you way more than hiring a human who actually understands the law to address the legal problems you're going to get. And meanwhile, we had all this wonderful work on expert system technology from the 70s and the 80s that basically got dead-ended because we didn't have computers that were fast enough, and we didn't have enough memory for those systems to grow to accommodate larger domains. Those roadblocks are gone now, and we're not even looking at any of that technology because nothing can get funded unless we're going to have a chat system thrown at it. And it's going to be a large language model chat system. We won't even do a conventional chat system. And my question to each one of these startups is, okay, so you're saying drop your legal document into the system, and it's going to, now, are you actually parsing the document to really know what's in it? Or just throwing it at a large language model and having it guess at what's in it? And just, crickets from
Kind of what I'm getting at,
all the startups.
what I'm getting at, Peter, and again, I think this is a really important concept as we use all these tools, is you can get 60, 70%, 80%, whatever the percent matters, it doesn't matter. You can get directionally where you want to go with these tools today. But in the end of the day, the nuance really matters. And you could end up causing a whole world of problems for people in the legal context or the technical context. If those nuances and those details aren't understood, and I've been using a lot of Claude and a lot of Gemini and different AIs. And to Mark's point that he made earlier on, at some point, he taught the AI the new fancy toy, and then he had to repeatedly tell the AI to stop playing with the new fancy toy and do something else. I've found that my case myself, or as I'm using the tools, okay, that new addition you added was great, but you just dropped the last 5 additions that we've added over the session we've been working on that I also liked. And so can you put those back in? And then invariably the AI says, oh, you're absolutely right. My mistake. I'm sorry. Let's go do this. And I'll add it back in. And then I'll have to often go through that exchange like 5 times. Are you freaking kidding me? You still keep dropping it. Ah, yes, you're right. Ah, yes, you're right. And then eventually it finally gets it right. So again, going back to the conversation we had with it was Dr. Bland, the nephrologist. Unless you are an expert in your domain and you actually know the nuances when you're using this tool, you've got to be really careful. Otherwise, you've just got to treat all of this as just generally we're going north, kind of.
Yeah, things are really, really bad.
Yeah, and then depending on how, and again, this is the other point, depending on how far you intend to go, 1 degree of, like if you're going to, if you're going to the grocery store 2 miles away, 1 degree off in the directional change you're going is not a big deal. You may end up at the Mexican restaurant next to the grocery store, but at least okay, there's a grocery store, I can go to the right place. If you're trying to go to another state or the moon or another country, you could end up on a different continent. So 1 degree change in the direction of where you're going, if the AI is pushing you in that wrong direction, you could end up in a really bad place. And I don't think people understand that.
Yeah, the systems are also incredibly bad at addressing legal issues because they have no concept of the actual law. So what they do almost invariably is they default to say that everything's illegal, even where it isn't. Because they like discuss, police tactics with them, and they will invariably side with the criminal. No technology should be used in an arrest because it could potentially lead to harm to the suspect. It's okay. So it's all right for police to pursue suspects and use a gun, which can actually kill them. That's good. But, if you want to use a bolo to knock them down when they're running, no, you can't do that because there's a possibility that the bolo could wrap around their neck and kill them. You can't use drones to follow them to their house to safely arrest them because that would be a violation of their privacy rights. But you're already in hot pursuit, and you can't use the drone to follow them until they're not running anymore to arrest them. So that it just makes no sense. They ignore all the legal issues. Then you try call them out on the legal issues, then they'll apologize, but still find a way to circle back to say you can't do anything every single time. It's just utterly maddening because again, there is no model of the actual law in there. It's just defaulting to what the training people want to align to try to minimize the possibility that someone might sue the AI provider down the road by following the AI's advice. Also, before I forget, on the topic of the management consulting firms not wanting to hire the kids coming out of school, maybe a factor of that is the degree to which the college degree is no longer a reliable metric of whether they learned anything because the assumption is that everyone has the AIs writing their papers for them. Steven Pinker did a piece that just came out talking about how he'd been issuing the same text to students for the past 25 years in his course, and they got the same multiple choice exam, and the performance was 10% down on the identical exam questions year for year over that period. Meanwhile, the GPAs of the students at Harvard were going up instead of going down. So their overall real performance is plunging. Their paper performance from the university, suddenly everyone's a star student, and it makes the degree itself worthless as a signal to a potential employer. The only way that we're going to be able to evaluate students going forward, I think, is the old-fashioned come in for an in-person recitation. You will not have your laptop in front of you. You will have an actual conversation with a human, call it a modified Turing test. And if we can't tell the student who completed the course from someone who's actually an expert in the area, then we say they passed. And otherwise, go back and study harder.
Yeah, that's pretty good. I like it. Mr. Bernstein.
Yeah. Clay Shirky had a nice
Real
editorial.
quick, Peter, can you drop a link into that article before I forget?
I'll try to find it. Let me do a quick Google and see if I can turn it up again.
Go ahead. Sorry, Mark.
Clay Shirky, who's a name to conjure with from early RSS world, had a op-ed in the Times about this problem of evaluation in college. That in fact, the rubrics we've been using just aren't going to function in the future, and viva voce exams may actually be better for the world we're in. But I also wanted to emphasize that while asking the AI for legal advice is bound to be a very poor idea, whatever the question, there are lots of tasks that you can do, ask a AI to do, that you can trust it on because it is unlikely to give you a bad answer that you won't find out about, that's both consequential and that you won't discover immediately. there are lots of tasks that we have for agents who are lazy, potentially dishonest, tend to make things up, uh, sycophantic. I mean, okay, this is actually the way lots of undergraduate assistants present themselves to their first job. And you don't give them the keys to the bank account. You don't even give them the cash drawer. But there are lots of things that you can give them to do. And if they do it well, it's a huge win. If they do it superbly, you've got a valuable resource. And if they do it entirely wrong, you're not greatly disappointed, and you can find out right away. My favorite example is you can ask these AIs for the top 3 books on really obscure subjects, and that will almost always give you books. They'll almost always be good books. The AIs tend to favor things from Oxford University Press and Cambridge University Press unduly, but I know other people who do that too. And they often won't stand their ground, but like when I wanted to find out about the mechanisms underneath the Byzantine throne, which for important state occasions rose out of the floor up to the ceiling, surrounded by mechanical trees with chirping birds and roaring lions. And what do we know about how the underlying technology led to Nero's famous rotating dining room? I asked it what we know about Nero's rotating dining room, and it gave me some reports in German and some reports in French. Said, what are the best English language sources? And says, sorry, there aren't any. So, okay, it will occasionally stand its ground and give you unpleasant results. But again, if it just made something up, I'd find out right away, and I just wasted a minute or two trying to find a book that doesn't exist. There are lots of things that you can do with these stochastic parrots that aren't very parrot-like, and which they often give you good results, and if they give you bad results, you're going to find out right away.
If you know what you're doing. That goes back to Dr.
Oh,
Bland.
yeah.
It goes back to Dr. Bland's point. The best use of an AI is by an expert that knows that is a domain expert in their field. Because then that way you know when it's bullshitting you. or it says, or you're like, I didn't expect that answer. And maybe it did uncover a new angle of thought that you hadn't thought about, but you knew enough to say, huh, then as opposed to just accept it.
I must say I'm recanting slightly on some of my comments in terms of usefulness, in that I've started doing some very light, what you might call vibe coding, but only because it's a classic thing that I knew I needed sort of a command line to do something. I knew vaguely the tools involved. I didn't know enough to just sit down and write it. I could have wasted a day sort of negotiating the way through. It's been quite interesting. I've used, it happens to be Claude because we had it for doing some testing stuff with Tinderbox, but I genuinely say, actually, I'm just surprised that it's better than I thought it would be. You obviously need to do some tweaking, but these are the sort of tasks where it either works or it doesn't, and it's not going to break anything. But the fact you could do something that might otherwise take you an awful lot of time and frustration, where you're just constantly circling the drain and never quite getting into the middle, actually has been very impressive.
Awesome. Hey, Erwin, what's this 360-degree pizza thing you're putting in?
It's related to Nero's rotating dining room. They've built one in the Alps.
Interesting. All right.
Wasn't that Blofeld's lair on Her Majesty's Secret Service?
Exactly. All right. So you guys, so we've got about 40 minutes left or so in today's session. We could continue our AI discussion if you want. We could drop into this map that I've been ideating on for the last couple of weeks, or even if I want to tie this thinking together with what Mark and Anderson and I have been talking about now for about 2 months. Like what, Mark, maybe you can reiterate your topic of like, what are the building blocks of implementing a local AI or understanding AI? Is really the theme that you and I were talking about, and that's what inspired this building of this map. Yeah, Peter.
Yeah, could you show us how Tinderbox works with Tome? I'm not sure how to set it up.
Tome. I'm not familiar with that. And Mark, you want to?
Mark
Yeah,
recommended it as being a tool that would be able to talk to Tinderbox and get that to talk to Olama.
I put it near the beginning of the chat, the one pointer I have, which is that you need to get it's got a dialog box where you entered the path to the application, and you have to enter the full path to your Tinderbox app's executable. And I typed that into the forum. I only have one machine that has any hope of actually running Olama, and it may not have enough memory, so I'll have to fix that. I believe that and the current Backstage release ought to work okay. The previous Backstage release, Olama opened several Tinderboxes until hilarity ensued. But I think that may be okay. But once you've got the app path and the dialog box, you've caught up to the state of the art for Olama Tome Tinderbox.
I think I missed when you typed that in. I might have been a couple minutes late. Could you retype the
Will
pointer?
do.
Yeah, I
Great, thanks,
don't
Mark.
have it in my chat either, Mark. What's the Tome reference?
It's
Okay, I'll put
following
it in the forum.
Peter's comment. Below where Peter asked if you could get Tinderbox working with Tome.
Yeah, I'm not seeing it, but all right. Oh, okay. Okay, cool. All right. What else? Do we want to play with Git, or do we want to look at the AI modeling? What do we want to pivot to?
Personally, I think we beat AI to death.
All right, let's look at the
Hey,
Git.
what do you know, Chuck?
Michael, just so I understand, the one thing let me phrase this the right way, unless it sounds wrong. But what I was going to say, what is the point of using Git? So in other words, how does this relate? I missed some of the earlier parts. So, what does this relationship? I mean, I know what Git is.
Well, Git has
but
no relationship whatsoever with the AI discussion.
No. But is this to do? Is this has the past discussion thus far been about storing Tinderbox in Git, or was it some other?
Yeah.
Okay.
So Mark Bernstein about 3 weeks ago gave us a high level overview of Git, and I've been playing with it with a certain and there and the Mac OS has a Git. Gets installed with the Mac OS local, it is part of the OS. And there has been a desire amongst I don't think you were on the meetup we did a few weeks back with that. And there's been a desire to like further that discussion to actually think about how how does one really do it? Right. And maybe we can spend the last half an hour of today's session, step by step, and we can do it on my machine just to walk it through and like set up a Git repository, put in a file, use the command line to do that. Look at the Tower app to show you that how you can have a GUI that triggers that command line, and then possibly set up a run command in your Tinderbox to actually run those Git commands. So that would be kind of the and that's a lot. I think that would be a lot to try to cover in 30 minutes, but we could certainly try. But there's been a desire, especially from Andreas over in Germany, to kind of better understand that. And maybe it starts with David Eddy's point, though, of
It's that, I mean, basically, given that we have supercomputer powers with Tinderbox, and the way the human brain bounces around on how it looks at problem solving, how individually, how to get us in the habit of taking notes and working them through a process to get vetted and loaded into Tinderbox. Just loading everything in the Tinderbox is obvious. I'm assuming people have learned is not a good approach. And change. I mean, the fact that you have to admit that basically an individual is multiple people, particularly the kind of people that are attracted to Tinderbox. We're all multiple personalities and problem solving from different directions, and how to control these many, I just call them brain farts. Or, oh, I had no idea. I forgot I was working on that problem 6 months ago, but I used different language. And it's a discipline, very important discipline, and I would say necessary to have, given we all drive supercomputers now, embedded into our work process. Is that enough obtuse,
Yeah, I mean,
obscure,
yeah, and
philosophizing?
it's interesting, and I think part of again, one of the challenges we had too is different tools for different purposes. Like Tinder, like we've talked about this ad nauseum, and like Jeremy's point earlier, we're repeating topics, which is perfectly fine. Tinderbox is a place for thinking, as we've all talked about. Like Devon Think is a place to store files like PowerPoints and PDFs and images and documents. I mean, there are different tools for different purposes. And you don't want to be dumping all of your PDF files into or the volumes and volumes of text that a chat would generate into your Tinderbox file, in my opinion, because I think that would just create an ungodly mess. You want to be thinking, in the tool that is Tinderbox for uses of thinking. There might be other methods for doing that.
Well,
but that's different than, and again, where I struggle a little bit, or where I could use some help personally on this idea of Git, and it being and maybe Mr. Bernstein or Chuck, because you guys seems to be experts on this more than us, is that define that for us. It's this ability to create archived copies, differential copies of a particular file, look at them, and most of the time, I think Git's in similar archiving. It's archiving is the wrong word. What's the word I'm looking for?
well, it's source control.
Source control, right? And
And
is it best used for amongst groups, or can an individual really get value from having a use of Git versus, say, just like their Arc backup or something like that? Like where does that fit for an individual versus like teams?
all right, so let me take a stab at
Please.
what I think some of the issues might be, and what we might mean when we talk about using Git with Tinderbox. And I'm going to leave aside the issue that maybe Git is something on the side and Tinderbox gives you a tool for dealing with things maintained in Git. That's a whole nother topic, and that could be very interesting. I'm not going to go there. Let me suggest, what are some of the things that you could use when we say source control, the history of that is people were developing programs and they needed to keep track of the different versions of programs, and they needed to be able to revert, we made some changes to that program and they were wrong, we need to take them back out. All those kinds of housekeeping activities is the original reason that these things were developed. But I'll just throw out an example. We all know that our computers have lots of files that are used to configure all the things that go on our computers. We use the settings app in Mac OS to set things. One of the first real examples of where source control went outside of its original heritage was when people started saying, we could use the same principle of source control, but on config files, and keep track of when people make changes to configurations of systems. And that led to a whole series of transformations. And so repositories where we keep this stuff have become much more elaborate than they were originally and used for much more than just source control. And when we think about Tinderbox, Tinderbox is a large, complex document, XML. It's all parsable, and it should be possible to keep track of changes made in Tinderbox notes over time through something like a source repository, like Git.
Well, and again,
And
is the term version control often not used?
version control
How is
is
source control and version control different?
well, that's what I was just getting at. Is source control is version control, but the concepts have been expanded into a whole variety of other fields besides just version control. For example, keeping track of the documentation that goes with software. That became an obvious thing to do. When did we change that document? How do we get the version of the document that applied to that version of the software versus the version of the document that applies to this version of the software? So all those kinds of things have kind of morphed over the decades to provide a fairly robust set of capabilities. And related to that is something else that might be of interest, which is the concept of shared repositories. And so this could be another vehicle for making it easier for people to share not necessarily an entire document, but subsets of their Tinderbox documents with other users, breaking things out and keeping track of what changed in those variants over time. But not just the tracking, but also the sharing aspect of it. And so I think we need to ask ourselves, are we looking at, do we want to track what goes on in our Tinderbox documents? That has some value. Do we want to share all or subsets of our documents with a larger community and make it easy for that larger community to see that, oh, so-and-so who originally developed that gave it to somebody else and they added these additional things, and those additional things are useful. I'd like to merge them in with what I've got. So those are some of the kinds of things we might want to talk about. I think it would help if we sort of tackled one or another specific topic. For example, just what could we do to keep track of changes made to a Tinderbox document for a single user? That's an interesting starting point. And then we could look at, well, now how could we use that in a group context or make it easier for people to share material across multiple players, other than just diving in and what do we do with Git?
Yeah. Okay, so let's start with that. I think that's a good one because Tinderbox is mostly a single user tool. I got somebody on my door, so you keep the conversation going. I will be.
Uh-oh. I was going to turn it over to Mark, who just suddenly vanished. Yeah, I guess what I would be interested in would be perspectives from other people in this group about, what it is that you would like to do with your Tinderbox documents that might involve keeping track of changes or sharing those documents. What's important? What is missing that you might be interested in doing that you think maybe some kind of version control or tool for tracking changes would be useful for? Peter, you raised your hand.
Yeah, actually, if I have something where I want to have versions on the outside as opposed to versioning of the Tinderbox document itself, but if I want my output to be versioned, I'll just duplicate the note and make that note a child inside of a versions subfolder of the note and just keep adding to that. And then I can have templates go back and pull out a version history and generate that in the final HTML that I'm outputting. So I don't even need a version control system for that. I can just do that internally in Tinderbox by copying the note as it is, again, drop it into versions thing, and then move on to edit the current working head. If I want to use the version control system, I prefer patch-based systems because they let you selectively revert a patch without having to reapply everything that was done afterwards. So the idea of the patch-based theory is that it's tracking the changes and can reorder the patches automatically using an algorithm on the back end. So if you decide that you don't want the patch where you change the formatting, but you don't want undoing the formatting to force you to roll back everything you did since you did that 2 weeks ago and then reapply it step by step in a patch-based system, you can simply nuke that one patch and have everything else that isn't incompatible with your not having made the patch that you nuked get reapplied and merged back in. So I find those systems to have a better logical model behind them than Git, but Git won the world in popularity, so we're pretty much stuck with it.
I guess I would say that Git does all of that, and so much more, which may be what you're getting at, is that it's a bit elaborate, and it's not. I guess Git suffers from the appearance of too much coming at you all at once. And that's just something that, again, is due to the history of it. It's evolved to support many different types of applications, many different contexts. And so it's very rich.
So here's a
represent-
question.
Yeah.
Riffing off of Erwin's comment that he's interested in working on multiple machines on the same file. This is the experience I had with Tinderbox running on an iMac and on a MacBook Pro with the same file open on each. The Tinderbox files are not static. Now, so it'll change, not just based on user input. It'll change based on time of day or whatever you've programmed your action code to do. Would it be, I guess, possible for Git to be integrated within that document through the run command, where my MacBook Pro, I'm away from my MacBook Pro, but Tinderbox is open with the Marmot open, and I'm on an iMac with Tinderbox open on the Marmot. I make an entry on the iMac, and then Tinderbox polls Git on the MacBook Pro or something, and sees that a change has been made on the iMac, and then automatically through action code and run command merges the change from the iMac version into the one that exists on the MacBook Pro, both of which exist in iCloud. So part of the problem is Tinderbox files are not static documents.
Yeah.
They can be doing stuff in the background.
Well, I think that's maybe a very rational application for these tools. I see your point, and I think it's one that a lot of people might share. And maybe that's one of the first things to probe at is, how would you use tools like this to simplify the problem of one person, one individual, maintaining synchronization between what they view of as being the same Tinderbox document, but gets worked on in different environments. That is certainly something that you could use Git for. And that, to compare it with other things, Michael, you've mentioned Arc, which is a backup utility. It's doing versioning, but it's doing versioning at the entire file level. Whereas Git would allow you to come in and say, this specific snippet of the document changed, and I want to merge it with the other variant of that document, which would be a much finer grained synchronization than what a file backup system could do, or Time Machine or things like that. Now, I should turn it over to Mark, who knows much more about this in the Tinderbox context than I do. You're on mute.
Please do keep an eye on me because this is not my strongest point of sailing. You should see the tower window and a folder called Meetup Demo. Am I sharing the correct screen?
I see repositories.
Yes. This is the tower window. Okay, very good. So I am going to open a Tinderbox window. I'm going to open add the hints. And now I'm going to make a space for all David Eddy's 3 mentees for their first day or so. And now I'm going to save that. Into Meetup demo. There we go. And there we have our file. Okay, I'm going to get out. Now, I'm going to make this into a Git repository. Do I want to create a repository? Yes, that's what I wanted to do. And there it is.
Is that Git desktop running?
This is, no, this is Tower.
Which is a Git desktop.
Which is a visual interface to Git. I strongly recommend using it or some other. In the Meetup, there's a 30% discount, and it's not an expensive tool, but you don't really need to worry too much about learning all the command line stuff. Yes, you'll need it when you want to have it automated from run command, but you don't need to do it at the start. So I have this working copy. It has one file. I'm going to say started the project. And I'm going to say, yeah, everything's part of the project. And I'm going to commit, which means I'm going to check it in. When in the very early days at Eastgate, we had big projects that had like 10 separate files, and we had checkboxes on the bulletin board so that if you wanted to work on one of the files, you went and put a red push pin to show you were working on it. And then the other person at the other desk wouldn't make changes that would conflict with your changes. So that's what I'm doing there. Okay, notice still the same. Now I go and I'm going to open it up again. And so Becky is going to add some tasks. We're going to save them, and now we see there have been some changes in the project. And Becky is going to say, Becky, and we're going to have it all, and we'll commit that. So now we have started the project and some history. Peter.
Yeah, I find that it helps to, well, I have to do it in small chunks, because if I do too big a thing, I'll have, correcting a typo from what I was working on previously, getting mixed into the same patch as making a substantive change to a data structure. So you really have to consciously make an effort to break it into small chunks. Otherwise, your patches are going to have too much lumped together and it won't be nearly as useful.
Yep. Quite true. Do as I say, not as I do. The more focused the commits, the better. Yes, there's the discount. Okay. So now Bill on some other machine starts working on this. Okay, I'm going to check it out. And sorry.
And if we both check out the document and we've worked on different parts, when we check it back in, we can merge the documents without overwriting each other.
That's right. And that's the point of this. I am having and if there are multiple files I can do separately with different files.
And can you have a Git repository on a Google Drive or a what would it be better, Google Drive or a what's the word I'm looking for? One of the other.
I understand what you're asking. Help me on this, Chuck. My first impulse is that's going to be a world of hurt, but I can't convince myself that it won't work just fine.
Well, actually, I think it can be a world of hurt, and which is why the services exist like GitHub and GitLab and things like that. They solve that problem.
And
Right.
what is that problem?
And which is your database is effectively a bunch of text structures. And if you put it onto a shared storage system, now multiple people might interact with that. And there's no logic that says what came in from that user needs to be coordinated with what came in from the other user in the context of being a version control or source control system, which are roughly synonymous. So it's that you're trying to futz with a database that works differently than the shared file construct, and so you don't want to mess around with that. And
yeah, and on that note, what if you're doing work and you don't want it in like a public GitHub?
Then you can do the same thing locally, but you just have to select a file on a single place. And
no, but if you were collaborating with somebody else, like are there private?
Yes.
Yeah.
For example, Beanstalk.
Beanstalk, got it.
Yeah.
Which is,
Yeah.
I think, 15 a month, maybe 10 a month, for fairly reasonable projects and a handful of people, or 25 a month for Tinderbox size projects and more people.
You say, does it have a tick box of which agencies are allowed to read it?
Well, like everything, you don't want to expect your ISP or any of your service providers to do too much in terms of defending you when the government comes calling, but they might not be horrible. And how do I lower my hand?
Well, one thing that does strike me, so watch this with Git is sort of, it strikes me, it strikes me something sort of much better suited to the sciences than the arts, in a sense that, so the way you structure things, the way you consider the structure of things, generally when you're doing a more engineering sort of approach, there are sort of hard edges to bits, and there are points where, so a commit. So if you're thinking about, I don't know, some big sort of subject research thing you're doing, you may not necessarily be trying to think, I've just had a really good thought and I must write it down. Whereas you said, right, I've got to the end of this bit of code and I definitely need to sort of save that before I do the next thing. So I think that, I mean, I'm not saying this because I think it's antithetical to use of Git, but I think there's an interesting sort of, there's a missing bridge metaphor, but one way of putting it. So I think there's a lot of things that Git could do for people, but they might struggle to get going simply because it doesn't make obvious sense. So the things they need to do aren't described in a vernacular and a metaphor that they can understand.
I think that's a very valid observation. I mean, I think that is a real challenge, and it's part of the issue that these kinds of systems have evolved over a long period of time to serve many different purposes, and they've all accumulated a lot of clutter. I mean, I'd use it to a certain extent. Where I think we're about to see a industry trying to transition to new systems. Some of that is being generated by geopolitical concerns or economic concerns. Microsoft taking over GitHub and bringing it in-house and turning it into an AI system is going to really shake up a lot of people and probably cause a lot of problems.
Well, and just to pause you right there, there's a great example of a kind of open sourced free environment where we can all be comfortably sharing and using our stuff, to then have a commercial entity step in and monetize all of our crap without actually our permission, because the terms and conditions and privacy policies can be changed overnight. And there's very little you can do about that.
Right. And, you know, we're seeing a lot of that right now. A couple of sessions ago, I sort of started out by complaining about my need to have to get off VMware and transition to a different virtualization platform. That's due to Broadcom taking over VMware and basically saying, hey, we can do like what the drug companies do. We can just change the pricing structure and rip off all these people who are absolutely dependent upon our product, major data centers, things like that. Well, the same company has done the same thing relative to another area that is going to go through a major transition, which is the whole containerization world, Docker and all the things that are related to it. I don't know whether people are familiar with that or not, but it's basically building apps as a bunch of small micro pieces that you then glue together. And Bitnami was the GitHub of containers. And suddenly, overnight, you have to pay thousands of dollars to be able to use that service, thousands of dollars per month. So it's just huge impact, and everybody's saying, but wait a minute, you know, this is what everybody contributed. How can you get away with that? Well, right, lawyers, you can get away with a lot. And so, you know, these are things that are driving changes that have nothing to do with the technology, but that may result in fundamental changes to the technology. And we'll have to watch for the sequels to see whether or not the changes are worthwhile or detrimental. And I think Git and all of that world is about to go through a bunch of transitions, would be my reading the tea leaves. I just can't tell you where it's going to wind up. And it's just totally up in the air. And so it may be that AI does something useful there and gets adopted and made part of the whole system, or it could be that AI blows it up.
Yeah, and to Peter's point in the chat, free can be very expensive in the long run.
Well, if it's free, you're not the customer, you're the product. I mean, that's what Google taught us a long time ago.
Yeah. But you know, to make a point, there's nothing that says that we as the Tinderbox community or any project, anybody, all these tools are still available. You can still run them locally. It's already available to us. So we don't have to be terribly concerned about everything that's going on in the larger world if we are able to bring these things in-house and run them ourselves.
Right.
And I think that's very doable. And there are certainly other artisanal software players like Tower and Beanstalk and others who are providing the capabilities to do this stuff and are providing adequate support at reasonable cost. So, you know, the world's going to change a lot. We don't necessarily have to change with it.
Right. Let me see. How do you? Hang on, I'm gonna double check. Keep saying talk one more thing. I'm gonna check one more thing.
I'm not the stuff to talk about. I've already talked too much.
I want to demonstrate one more thing before people move, before we finish today. Because I appreciate your demonstration of with Tower. Double here, make directory. Okay, but what I'd like to do, that if possible, Mark, is this. Let me go ahead and share my screen. Because one thing that I kind of missed while you were doing your demo when you were using Tower is, as great as the interface of Tower is and it's helpful, it is actually it's an abstraction layer above the command lines of Git. So if we were to say, let's say I've got my command line and I'll go CD documents. So I'm now in my right? No, CD.
Capital D.
What? How do I go back again? Is that right? How do I get to my let me just start a new shell.
Just CD tilde. And then you can
Tilde
slash
slash documents.
So now I'm in my documents directory, right?
Right?
Yes.
Okay. So now if I make a new directory, like make directory
MKDIR.
MKDIR, make directory, I don't know, git test, right? So I'm in my documents folder and I now make a directory called git test.
It exists.
Oh, all right. Make directory git test 2. All right. So we've used the command line and we've just created a directory called git test 2. And that and so this is what the UI is doing behind the scenes and running these commands for us from our solution. So then the next command is I want to now change directory and go to git test 2. So I'm now telling the command line, just like I did when I double clicked on the UI, to go to that directory git test 2. And then if I say git, if I'm doing this right, I say git init to initialize, and that created a empty git repository. And you see now here, I've got this grayed out directory. And if I hit Shift Command period, that grayed out directory goes away. What the Apple OS does is it hides what's called hidden directories from us, so that we don't screw up some of those config files and all those directory kind of files that are running the machine. But if you know what you're doing and you're comfortable doing that, you hit Shift Command period and that invisible directory comes up. And so there is the Git repository. That's that invisible file, that hidden file that the Git is running. So now if we go to Tinderbox, and I will create a new file. So here is a brand new Tinderbox file. And let's go ahead and save that Tinderbox file. Where's my documents? Documents, git test 2. We'll call this one git test 2. So we've now got a Tinderbox file called git test 2 that is now in that directory that we've just created using the command line. And we'll say my note. Okay, so now we've got a file in here called my note. And now what I want to do is I want to commit this file to the Git repository. So we hit copy. Let me just, I'm using chat on the side to give me the instructions. What is the And so I think the first step we need to do is we need to run the add command. Yeah. So git log. Just doing my test here. If I don't. So I think again, correct me if I'm wrong, Chuck, but I think it's git add and then the name of the file. Yeah, test2.tbx. So now what we're doing is we're adding that file to the repository. So we hit enter. And so now I've added that. And if I do git log, oh, I got to commit before I can log. So I've added that file. I've staged that file to the git. And now if I say git commit m adding git test2. So now I'm
which your comment,
which is and the M is my comment that I'm adding. So I'm adding this now to the Git repository. So we've just added that to the Git repository.
Michael, you typed text2, but you had test2 on the file.
Doesn't matter because that's just a comment.
Okay.
Right. So I've added so if I say no git, not gif, git log. And so you see that the Git's now telling me that I've added this file to the Git. Now, if I go in here and I add another note. So right now I've modified and changed this file. Let's throw in some text in here. So I've modified and changed that file. So now if I go back here and I say git commit, I think I need to add it again, actually. Git add, because you got to stage it again. So I'm adding git test 2.tbx. So I'm adding that into the stage. And then I say git commit -m new update for Bruce. Right. Right. Now I've added that update to the file. And if I say log, git log, it's now showing me the logging that I've done with that. So all you're doing is using these command lines to do that. Now, if we open up the Tower app again, and I'll pull the Tower app, onto my thing. So here's the Tower app. And if we open a repository, so I go to my desktop using the Tower app, documents, git to. So I'm opening this repository, and now we're in the Tower app. You can see here are the versions that I've done with that. So now if I add another version of this, my note 3, and I go back to, git add, git tbx. And again, I don't know if this is exactly the right step. No, sorry.
Git test2.
Test 2.tbx. So we've staged that. And now if I say git commit m new update, enter. So we've now added that change to this. And if we now go to Tower, you'll see Tower has now recognized that we've added a new change. So I just kind of wanted to walk us through that so we could see at the end of the day, Git is a command line utility. And if you run a ChatGPT request, ChatGPT can give you all of the commands that you would need to run step by step. And this is another great use of AI, right? Rather than having to go down to the library and buy a book or do a Google search or anything like that, just say, hey, ChatGPT, what are all of the commands that I would use to interact and pull stuff out of with Git? And so all of these are the individual command lines that are controlling that application called Git. And because it's a command line tool, you have to feed it each command individually. And all Tower has done as an app is abstracted those individual command lines for you to be able to do that. So you're not having to run it individually in the terminal. And then one step further would be, and we don't necessarily need to do this today, but we can do it at some other point, is you can use the action code in Tinderbox. So if I were to pull up here and I'd go here and I'd run a stamp. And if you guys want to hang on, we can actually do it. I can run a stamp where I say run command. And I can then actually create a run command that would model those command lines that we just used for get. Right. And so then that way you could actually be, and again, maybe this is, if we want to take the time right now, we could, but we're a little bit over.
Yeah.
But well, maybe we do it next week. But what we can do is build out a run command that models those command lines that we were just doing in the command line exactly as Tower is doing, and have a stamp in Tinderbox that would publish those commits for us. And that's really the process.
Yeah.
Right.
One of the other things, Michael, that might be worth exploring in a future meetup is, along with the source control systems, there tend to be a series of companion edit applications or tools that are used to look at the changes that are made.
Well, for example,
to do the diffs, as the typical vernacular, what are the differences between this document and that document?
Right.
And that's something I think people would find useful as well. It's maybe integrated with the Git tool you use, but often it's a separate application.
Well, for example, a great version of that is Tower integrates really nicely with BBEdit.
Correct.
And so if you're using Tower as your Git app, Tower will launch when you ask it to show a diff. Tower will say, well, which diff app do you want to use? And it's, and it's one of its defaults is BBEdit. It says, can I use BBEdit to show you those diffs? Because it doesn't want to be a text editing tool. It wants to be your Git repository command line triggering tool. And BBEdit's much better at text management.
Yeah, and another option that for people who are aware of it is Xcode has a pretty good diff display capability that I've used a lot in the past. So that's where the point that Peter made earlier. If you don't do things in bite-sized chunks, it can get a little bit elaborate. But if you do have a whole series of changes you need to review and decide which ones to keep and which ones to not to discard, something like a diff editor could be very helpful in dealing with those kinds of situations.
All right. Well, we got there, guys. That was fun. Thank you very much. And we will see you next week. Now, by the way, I think I may have a conflict next week. I'll let you know. We may need Mr. Anderson or Bernstein to run the show next Saturday, I think.
Mark's going to be on the road.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, we'll figure it out. But I think I have a conflict, but we'll see.
Have a great week.
All right.
Yeah.
See you, everybody.
Bye.
Bye-bye.